big show today, so let's get moving. Now, kids, it's time for the Anaglyph Jukebox. Hey, Joe, what do you got for us today?
Well, hey, Johnny Laser. Today we're taking a look back at the silent film star Louise Brooks. Her heyday was in the 1920s. You'll see from her look, she epitomized with her bob hairstyle and her carefree beauty the flapper era. At 15, she was a principal dancer with the Denishon School of Dancing. She was very rebellious. She got fired there. She next worked as a chorus girl in George White's Scandals as a semi-nude dancer in the 1925 edition of the Ziegfeld Follies. Walter Wanger saw her on Broadway, brought her immediately into a contract with Paramount Pictures. However, her greatest films were done when she was an expatriate in Germany. Two films with G.W. Past, Diary of a Lost Girl and Pandora's Box. She was an exquisite beauty. She had a brief starring career in Hollywood, spent a lot of years in obscurity, and towards the end of her life, she wrote a marvelous memoir. She had known people like W.C. Fields before he was in film. She knew Humphrey Bogart before he was in movies, and had stories of her Broadway days with these wonderful Hollywood legends. Louise Brooks, a forgotten star of the silent era. And now, if my good friend Herb will take it away.
Where is Paul sending us this week?
Paul apologizes. He can't be here in person, but he has sent me some text and introduction to his journeys today. Canals. English canals or the transport highways of the Industrial Revolution. And at their height, they formed a network 4,000 miles long. They were built between 1770 and 1830, but went into decline with the advent of the railways. Many canals are filled in and abandoned, and now there are only 2,000 miles of navigable canals, which are largely used today for leisure cruising. They're maintained by a national charity, and there are plans to reopen several long since abandoned sections. The photos here include shots of the National Canal Museum near Liverpool, an industrial mill and its pumping engine, a dried up section of canal, historic photos of canal bargemen, and some canal narrow boats and locks. Locks were used to raise the boats in steps to different levels when the route of the canal went over a hill. And now, if my good friend Herb will take it away.
All hail this grand day, when with gay colours flying, the barges are seen on the current to glide, when with fond emulation all parties are vying to make our canal of old England the pride. Long down its fair stream may the rich vessel glide, and the Croydon Canal be of England the pride. And may it long flourish, while commerce caressing adorns its gay banks with her wealth-bringing stores. To Croydon and all round the country a blessing, may industrious sons ever thrive on its shores. Along down its fair stream may the rich vessel glide, and the Croydon Canal be of England the pride. And now, my good fellow, sure nothing is wanting to heighten our mirth and our blessings to crown, but with the gay bells on its banks to be flaunting, when spring smiles again on this high favoured town. Long down its fair stream may the rich vessel glide, and the Croydon Canal be of England the pride.
Thank you all. This week's guest is Steven Pinker. Steven Pinker is a world-renowned author and has so many accolades. I prefer that you just look them up by yourself, or we'll never get started. But for now, he's just a fellow stereographer. First, before we begin, how did you get into the stereoscopy and any interest in 3D?
Yeah, so I'm a cognitive psychologist. I'm interested in how the mind works, including visual perception. And did my thesis on spatial imagery, how people mentally rotate objects in their mind's eye. And one day I was walking in Harvard Square and I passed in front of the window of the Harvard Coop, the Harvard Cooperative Society. And this was in the 90s when you all remember when magic eye stereograms were the thing, the model stereograms that pop into 3D without any headgear or glasses or apparatus. I was standing in the window and I looked at these squiggles, and then all of a sudden they popped out into dinosaurs. And I was just astonished. And I could not figure out how it worked. I mean, I understood what stereo vision was, but how an autostereogram worked, especially a random pattern autostereogram. And I was astonished and a bit ashamed that I couldn't figure it out. And I made a vow. I said, if I can't learn how autostereograms work so I can explain it to someone else, I don't deserve to call myself a cognitive psychologist. So I did. I had some colleagues at MIT and they sent me to the literature. And I ended up working my way through it and explaining it in my book. If you don't mind the product placement, How the Mind Works, there's a discussion of stereo vision up to and including autostereograms, just so that I could explain how the seeming miracle could be interpreted in light of how we know how human perception works. Now, I'd long been a photographer, and having my interest in stereo awakened, coming back from a sabbatical in California where I wrote the book. I was back in kind of drizzly gray New England, desperate for some photographic subject that could compete with California. And so I set up some flowers on my tabletop and put my, then it was a film camera on a focusing reel turned sideways, and I just took some side-by-side shots of flowers. That kind of kindled the interest until a number of years later, I saw on a photo auction site a strange device, a lens for like a camera in the 1950s that had twin lenses, had an attachment, I guess you call it a beam splitter, though it really isn't one for somewhat more distant photos. And I won the auction and I have used it ever since. And I find stereo photography a new challenge that after decades of taking photos, this just gives me another set of skills to master. With the help, I see that George Themalos, Dr. T, is in the audience, and he got me going on Stereo Photo Maker Pro and gave me a couple of tutorials for which I'm grateful. And since then, I've been quite an active, indeed an obsessive stereo photographer.
Now explain, is
So
this
this
one
is-
of those things you began with, the shots?
Yeah,
you
this
began-
is one of my first. It's an ultra. I love ultra macro stereo photography, and this was just a petunia that I just plucked from my garden and just used a macro lens and the focusing rail, just slid it over a few centimeters and took a second picture. It is in this anaglyph conversion, some of the color is lost, and we all know that there's no one correct way to do color anaglyph conversion. But I know that there is a compromise between how saturated it is and how many artifacts you get. So this is, I think, my understanding is this is on the side of fewer artifacts but less saturation. But in the original, it's an even more intense pink and yellow. But yes,
Was
this
this-
is one of
Was this from the film days?
this in the film days. This is on Fuji Velvia, which was known for its high color saturation, then scanned a number of years later and with the help of Stereo Photo Maker Pro, set a window and adjusted. This is also from the same series. This is, again, one of the first ones that I took. This is an inverted lily. That is a lily where the stamens are on the outside of the flower, kind of a freak that I just got at the supermarket, but it's particularly nice. Again, in the original color, it's a very intense red, and I think a very pleasing 3D shape as well. That's one more from my very first series of stereo photos. Again, this is a close-up of a tulip, macro shot.
And the slide bar.
And this is also with the slide bar, yes.
This is
Just
all through the slide bar.
just a focusing rail that I bought for macro photography, just to allow you to approach your subject at the millimeter scale, you turn it sideways, and it's an excellent side-by-side stereo device. I'm sure not many people have used that technique. And one more, this one I decided to let it pop out of the stereo window, but this is a Stargazer Lily from the same series.
And this is the same series, so this is all shot with
This is
film,
all
right?
back in, this is from the 90s. This is a Nikon, as we say now, analog camera. That would have been a strange concept in those days, but yes, taken in Velvia slide film.
Velvia,
Scanned. Yeah.
How'd you end up on Velvia rather than Kodachrome?
Better color.
Better-
I started
okay.
with Kodachrome, and when Velvia was introduced, it was just clear that as much as I loved Kodachrome, and not just because of the Paul Simon song, but the colors in Velvia were better still. Okay, so this is one of the first photos I took with the Nikon dual lens and the mirror attachment, this is from my house in Truro in the Outer Cape Cod. And I wanted to show off. I wanted a subject that had a lot of depth. These are the stairs going down to the beach. That's my family at the bottom. And this was one of the first subjects where I just wanted something with a lot of different depth in it. So these are stairs down to Cape Cod Bay.
And that was it's interesting because you have the depth from the stairs, and also obviously you can't get the depth from the gate, the little fence down there, but because of the shadow, it kind of creates a depth.
Well, yes, and that's one of the things that interests me as a cognitive psychologist is that one of the big lessons that we teach our students when we talk about depth perception is that the brain uses multiple cues to depth. I don't have to remind people in this audience of that stereo gives a particular kind of solidity to empty space that makes it particularly vivid. But of course, when you close one eye, the world doesn't completely flatten out. There are other cues, like, as you mentioned, shadows, shape from shading, the way that the different contour of a curved surface gives information about its 3D shape, linear perspective, texture gradients, aerial perspective, and so on. And of course, we all know who do stereo photography that you want to kind of have them multiply, and you don't want them to compete, which is why placing the stereo window is significant. But yes, here the shadows help. This is a side-by-side. This one loses a lot in this particular kind of anaglyph conversion because these are very intense colors of a mauve and cantaloupe sky. You can see it on my website, or those of you watching it on stereo TV will appreciate the colors. There's a Cape Cod sunset. Okay, so then I have a series here, just three of the Highland Light in Cape Cod. The first one is the approach, again, trying to show off with a scene with a lot of depth. There's a lighthouse that goes back to the, I think, 1860s. It's been moved back from the edge of the cliff because the cliff was eroding, but it's still in use and kept in pretty good condition, as the next couple will show.
And this is the Nikon with the beam splitter?
No. Now I'm with a Leica with the 3D attachment.
Okay, gotcha.
Through the dual lens with the mirror that gives you a wider stereo base mirror attachment. This is inside the lighthouse. Looking up, you can climb to the top. It's a brick lighthouse in the 19th century. You can see the top kind of top center of the picture. You can see the glass housing. And then the next one.
And being in portrait mode, so again, we're still with the Leica?
Well, still with Leica, so
Okay.
the pictures themselves force you to be in portrait mode, although the camera that I have, the M11, has such high resolution, it's a 60 megapixel, that you can crop pretty aggressively and not lose any significant resolution. So I do have, yeah. So this is what you see when you get to the top of the lighthouse. They no longer have a rotating mirror, and certainly don't have whale oil lamp anymore, but this is the electronic lamp, and you kind of see beyond the lamp in the lighthouse to the Atlantic Ocean behind it.
And the whales are happy about that, I'm thinking.
The whales are delighted. So this is in a pond nearby, again using, this is using a close-up lens that I glued to an adapter ring, and when I take off the mirror attachment and attach and I just use the smaller base, but then with just a regular close-up lens, you can get pretty close. And this is in a local pond, a green frog.
How many shots did you have to do to get this guy?
Yeah, he was. He has a critical distance when you encroach a little bit too close to his defensible space. Then one leap and he's gone. So this is just outside the perimeter of what he would tolerate.
It's a nice shot.
This is
It's a little difficult.
this is a toad, and that is the hand of my grandson, at the time 6 years old, as people who with small boys know, small boys attract toads. And here he is holding a toad who doesn't seem too happy, but but it makes for a good shot.
And that's the life of a toad. So he goes.
Life of a toad, yeah. This is the Provincetown breakwater. Again, irresistible for a stereo photographer because it's got so much depth. You can see a tiny little lighthouse in the distance, but this was built 100 years ago to protect Provincetown Harbor from overwashes. You can walk across to Long Point, and again, it's got a lot of texture, a lot of perspective, and of course, a lot of stereo depth.
And again, that's what we were talking about the Leica.
Yes, so this is with the Leica, that's right.
I'll stop saying that until we change cameras. You can just let me know when we change. So
Okay. Now this is with a Leica, but not with the stereo lens. This is a Cha-Cha side by side. Actually, it's hyper stereo because it was at night. I had to rest the camera on a couple of posts on either side of this walkway. So this is might be a little bit difficult for some people to fuse, but it is the Provincetown breakwater at night. I timed it so that the lighthouse was flashing. I've got a nice starry sky in the background. I like the effect here. The clouds artifactually are forming a ceiling over that bit of Cape Cod Bay. And that is not a direct stereo effect. That comes from the fact that there was a slight wind. So the clouds shifted a bit between the first shot and the second shot, which of course results in an artifactual stereo depth. But I like the effect of that cloud ceiling and then the starry sky behind it.
no, it's excellent. So do you recall how fast you had to move?
Each one of these was a time exposure because it was at night. I did not have a tripod with me, but there was a gate, a fence, and the opening to the fence had a post on the left, post on the right. So I rested the camera on the left and on the right, probably not the optimal hyper stereo separation, but that's what I had to work with. I think it's still probably fusible for most people, and gives a nice hyper stereo depth. And the interval between the first shot and the second shot was allowed the clouds to move. So, and I didn't mind the artifact here.
And it was only 2 shots, or did you do a series?
Just 2, yeah, and then some cropping.
Got it. Okay, got it.
This was on another sabbatical in Berkeley, and this one was a nice lily that I bought in the supermarket. And again, the colors are, depending on the conversion, the colors are much more intense in the original.
No, did you like? How'd you like this? It's completely black behind it.
Oh, so yeah, so there was I think I put a black velvet cloth behind it. I lit it with a softbox that I had bought to illuminate myself during my Zoom lectures. And in fact, I'm using that softbox right now. Originally got during COVID, I set up a kind of a green screen studio in my study because I didn't want my students for that entire year and a half that the campus was shut down. I didn't want them to see like a professor in one square and a PowerPoint slide in another square. So I spent a lot of, one might say wasted a lot of time setting up a green screen studio in my study so that I could walk in front of my own PowerPoint slides like a weatherman and actually point to stuff with my fingers just to kind of prevent students from falling asleep. Anyway, as a result, I ended up with a couple of big soft boxes, and they're also very nice for illuminating macro subjects.
Excellent repurposing.
Yes. This is a California poppy. You've seen them any trip to California, they're everywhere. But this one had not yet unfurled, and I just loved that spiral shape. This was just plucked out of a field.
Yeah, you could taste the texture on that. It's beautiful.
One day I saw in my driveway a poor hummingbird that collided with a window and saw its end, and I didn't know, what do you do with it? It just seems too beautiful to just let it cat eat it or to throw it out. So went on the internet, I'm not a taxidermist. I went on the internet and it said to preserve a tiny bird, put it in a plastic bag with borax. The borax will desiccate it, and you've got a hummingbird. So I did that. I lost his eyeballs, as you can see, that they completely shriveled up. But then I thought it was a great subject for 3D photography. In the anaglyph conversion, by the way, the ruby throat of this hummingbird got lost, but it's an intense bright red, but that did not survive the anaglyph process.
Well, I'm sure the people watching on 3D TVs are enjoying this very much, as well as everybody else. At least you can see the depth, and if you can imagine the colors here.
Or you can also go to my website,
Oh, go to the
stevepinker.com.
web. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. So then on a trip to, again, during the sabbatical, we did a trip to Yosemite. And, Half Dome is a favorite photographic subject. But the challenge is, if you're a stereo photographer, something that is just so massive and so far away, how do you give it some depth? So this is on the road into Yosemite, and it was a hyper stereo. It's a little weird because you've got some cardboarding of the trees in front, which the depth is so massive that you can't simultaneously appreciate the depth between the line of trees and Half Dome, and also the three-dimensional differences within the line of trees. So it looks, as I'm sure a lot of people have had experience with, this is one of those cases where hyperstereo gives you a bit of a two-dimensional look of the foreground subject, but and it looks like it's just in two different depth planes. So not entirely successful as a photo. This was a little better. This was with the stereo attachment, and so this is with a normal separation. And here the depth comes from the trees in the foreground. And this is way closer to Half Dome than that original shot. But again, the challenge is for a stereo landscape photographer, how do you give some pleasing and realistic depth to large and far away subjects?
Does the Leica shoot in this format, or did you crop this?
No, the attachment with the two lenses takes side-by-side views in portrait mode, each of which taking 1/2 of the 35mm frame. So this was not cropped much because the original actually consists of two portrait shots on the same frame. And this is yet another attempt to get Half Dome with some depth. Here, the tree as a framing device. This was a cha-cha shot. So a conventional lens, and then making my best judgment as to how to give it a nice depth without making it unfeasible.
Good thing that guy's reading something.
And that guy's doing something. And a bit of problem was that the guy, he moved between one shot and another. So I had to do a little bit of cloning from one shot to the other so that I didn't get him in a double ghost image. And this is El Capitan. Here you get a little bit of depth from the trees on the right. You also have, because there's a little bit of, this was again a sequential shot. You can see the clouds. There's a little bit of movement. It wasn't a terribly windy day, but enough that the clouds moved from one to another, and so you get a little bit of an artifactual depth. The clouds seem to be in front of rather than behind El Capitan. So this is also in Yosemite. This is a giant sequoia that died and keeled over, and this is its trunk. Now here the challenge is, it's a great challenge for stereo photography, is you do get what stereo gives you that conventional photography doesn't, of course, is a third dimension, but it gives you, it's all, of course, relative depth. It's not absolute. You don't really know how deep or how big, and they trade off. Of course, the farther away something is, the smaller it gets, and the smaller the depth differences. And so from this, you can certainly get the three-dimensionality, but you don't really get a sense of how massive this tree trunk is until the next shot, where I had to put a familiar object in to recover a sense of absolute scale to see how big an object we're actually dealing with. So the next shot has a convenient three-dimensional object, that being my wife, the novelist Rebecca Goldstein, and she agreed to pose so we could just see how big an object we are dealing with. Again, this
that actually helps. Yeah, that helps a lot. For sure.
Now, it's only now that you recognize it. And of course, the phenomenon of miniaturization is what happens when you take a hyperstereo, and because we ordinarily don't see those depth differences in stereo, the brain compensates by shrinking the entire scene to give you what you would see if you did have that stereo information. It's another case of competing depth cues, which the entire time have to also be calibrated with your sense of absolute size. So this one, let me see if can I cue this up? Hang on. Now that's, I don't know if you heard that, this little snippet of my compatriot, the late Gordon Lightfoot, singing the praises of the Trans-Canada Railroad. This is the Canadian Rockies. I'm originally Canadian from Montreal, and both the Rockies and the railroad have a kind of mythical status in the Canadian consciousness. And on a trip to the Rockies, I again had the challenge of capturing the grandeur of very large, majestic objects from very, very far away. And so this is kind of an entree to a portfolio that I took in the Canadian Rockies. Every Canadian's dream.
Interesting.
This is Lake Louise. Here again, boy, those of you seeing it in anaglyph are missing a lot of the famously intense turquoise of Lake Louise with mountains and glaciers in the background. So this is an attempt to capture something of the scale of it with the foreground rocks. And this is the Vermilion Lakes. Again, the name clues you in that there's a lot of color in reality. The Sandglass conversion didn't quite get it. But here we have Mount Rundle in the background, beautiful three-dimensional shape. Kind of, you can see how it was originally a sedimentary stratum that got upended from tectonic activity, with the mirror lakes in the foreground. And here back to Lake Louise, we've got the mountain called Big Beehive and Agnes Lake in the foreground. Now, the last series are from a trip to northern Arizona, where any landscape photographer has on his or her bucket list the slot canyons of Antelope Valley, especially in the glory days of photo magazines, when you go to a magazine shop and there'd be half a dozen different photo magazines, and many of the best ones British. And it was just kind of common knowledge, conventional wisdom among landscape photographers that together with Monument Valley and a few other things, you just had to make a trip to the slot canyons in northern Arizona. Not so easy to get to, but these are narrow canyons between steep walls where hundreds of thousands of years of sudden floods and rapids carved beautiful, swooping, striated formations in these slot canyons in intense red and purple and gold sandstone. So once again, I'll have to kind of preemptively apologize that this anaglyph conversion loses the very intense vermilion and crimson and gold. But this is one of several shots that I tried to take. I don't know of anyone who's tried to take the slot canyons in stereo. It's a challenge because there's not much room to maneuver. And so you're often quite close to a rock surface that you have to reconcile with the more distant view. In this case, I was lucky enough to get a sunburst in the same shot.
And you know what's great about that? Notwithstanding the color, we all have imagination, we'll figure that out. But the fact that the sun is breaking through only in the right eye, right?
Only the right eye, yes. That's one of and of course, when you do stereo photography, you come to appreciate that even when you're taking shots simultaneously, there are some optical phenomena that result in binocular luster, where just because of the reflective properties of a glossy surface, the two views a few centimeters apart can be different, giving kind of artifactual stereo effects. Here, only the right lens was in the exact position to get the sunburst, part of which is artifactual anyway. That's because of the very narrow, the small aperture of the lens and the blades of the diaphragm combined with diffraction give you that sun star, but it's a pleasing effect, and it works even though you're right, it's only in one of the two images.
It's great. That's just it's one. Oh wow.
So this was this is, you can kind of use this as a Rorschach test and see what kind of what you see in that foreground rock surface. I think it actually has a name. I think it's called Big Bear, and you could kind of imagine a bear in there.
Oh yeah, I see I see the bare face.
But that kind of shows you these beautifully swooping contours that the sudden flash floods carved over hundreds of thousands of years. Which also means, by the way, you got to be very careful about when you go in. If the weather report says that there's going to be a rainstorm, these could fill up with water very quickly.
That would be a problem.
That would be a big problem. So this is another one in these.
But you get a good angle, you get a good camera angle for about 2 minutes. Anyway,
that's true. Yes, it'd be very dramatic as the water started to rise.
we'll work our way through.
This is in northern Arizona. The butte in the distance, if you're part of the expression, it's a butte. It itself would be a gorgeous subject with a telephoto lens, a classic Western scene. It's not Monument Valley, but it gives some of that flavor. But in this case, the combination of the butte in the distance and a classic Western barbed wire fence seemed to me to make an interesting 3D composition. And again, this is, as all of you know, you got to think differently in 3D in terms of composition. So outside of the north rim of the Grand Canyon, there's an area of hoodoos where there are these fantastic rocks balancing improbably on piles of rock or sand. I believe that the phenomenon is that as the softer rock underneath them eroded, they shifted ever so slightly as it was eroding, and so they compressed the rock and sediment under the center of gravity at any point, which meant that that bit of sediment eroded more slowly. And so improbably, the erosion left them on a pedestal simply because the very process of erosion caused its point of center of gravity to shift, its point of maximum compression to shift, allowing the pedestal to survive. And there's a field of dozens of these just on the side of the highway. I think it's called Bitter Springs.
I guess if a wandering tribe or anything comes across this, bing, you got a religion.
Right. Or a sequel to 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Oh, there we go. Perfect segue.
Again, by the way, this is here's another one, the same field. Again, this is in the original, very intense orange. And then some joker decided to, as a prank, to build a house around one of these hoodoos, so it looked as if the boulder crashed into the top of the house. So and of course I couldn't resist.
Well, I like you could see the depth going out through the left doorway there, I think, right? So,
yes, and I like when that's possible. And then this is a cha-cha of the north rim of the Grand Canyon. It's the part of the Grand Canyon that fewer people see because it's harder to get to, a bigger drive or flight. But on the same trip, another bucket list item was to see the north rim of the Grand Canyon. And to give it some depth and scale, I found some trees on the overlook. Again, you're missing a lot in color if you're seeing it as an anaglyph. But this is these are cha-cha shots.
Yeah, this actually works to a large degree. I do feel like I'm standing there. Thank you for the tour. Oh, look at that.
Irresistible to a stereo photographer. I think it's called Angel's Rock, but it conveniently has a hole in it, and so just made for a stereo photographer. Ooh. This is the Glen Canyon Dam. I did not put my life in my hands in order to take the photo beyond the chain link fence on the Glen Canyon Dam bridge, but just kind of leaning over and taking 2 shots a few centimeters apart. Again, the problem being, okay, so this is another bucket list item for.
Oh, you were going to go.
Oh yeah. Well, again, the challenge is a very large object far away doesn't generally give you stereo depth cues. Stereo peters out after about 30 feet or so, as just because of the high school trigonometry of binocular disparity as a function of distance. So hyperstereo is necessary to give you a stereo effect at those distances. This was a real challenge. So this is Horseshoe Bend, another bucket list item for landscape photographers. As far as I know, I'd never seen one taken in stereo. This did require considerable hyperstereo in order to give any perception of depth whatsoever. So I took a shot, walked over a few feet, took another shot, I actually did a series and then found the pair that seemed to work the best. The challenge of that, and this is Wotan's Throne in the north rim of the Grand Canyon at sunset, and this also was hyperstereo with 2 successive shots. And the
And
sunset,
I don't want to be redundant, but oh yeah, hyperstereo. Okay, you're the hyper. So
yeah, and sunset collaborated, the sun and poked through just at the right moment to illuminate that rock face. Again, if you're not seeing it in color, then you're missing a large part of it. Okay, so this is a case where I decided to experiment with artificial intelligence generated stereo, and so this was done with I think it was with Immersity. I'm a little squeamish about using it just for the same reason that I was squeamish when they started to colorize films. There seemed to be something kind of vaguely illicit about it, but nonetheless, when I had some 2D pictures interspersed with a 3D portfolio, I wanted them to be 3D as well. And so this is an example of what you get in the AI conversion. Not bad. I think it's pretty.
no, not at all. And many of those conversions I see now are again, I don't mind.
And what I've discovered, if I go back to myself, I'll show you something I was just playing with last night. That there is I'm sorry, here's one more. This is another also from the north rim of the Grand Canyon. I think the depth effect is quite pleasing and does not seem too artifactual. I mean, that's the danger. I think the depth differences may be a bit exaggerated here compared to my memory of reality. Though it's always hard to tell, and indeed that was one of the things that I studied in my thesis. How good are we when our eyes are closed? We are visualizing a 3-dimensional scene that we can't see at the present, so it's being reconstructed from memory. You're kind of going top down from your memory of an experience to an image in the mind's eye. How good is the depth? I actually found that we do a fair amount of compression when we reconstruct something from memory, but nor is it perfectly flat or 2-dimensional. But anyway, that very process means that if you take a picture in 2D, convert it to 3D with AI, and then try to ask yourself, is the depth exaggerated compared to when I was there? It's a very hard judgment to make because your memory of what you saw when you were there is apt to be compressed.
Boy, I feel smart because I already felt that way in general. If you were there, it changes your opinion of that image. If you were physically in that spot and you took that shot, no matter what conversion process happens. I always felt that way myself. Look at me. Should we go? Okay, so this is actually with the camera, right? You said this is
with the camera. This is a hyperstereo successive shots, and I think, do I have one more AI?
And one more. Okay, no, that was this.
No, not that one. Let's see. Well, maybe not. Let's see.
Yeah, I think that was it. That was the last one. Let me go back to this.
But when you scrutinize what the AI does, and it is, obviously fallible. We all know from using ChatGPT and other large language models that they do have a tendency to what they sometimes call hallucinate. Confabulate would probably be a better word. But and that happens in 3D as well. But there are often strange wiggles and angles that the 3D algorithm interpolates into the image. I'll just show you, if you see my backdrop, this is a shot of the Charles River Basin in Boston. It's not literally behind me. I'm indoors now, but it's not far from where I'm sitting. So I tried it with a different set of settings. This isn't bad, although we've got some. Let's see, can I point to it? I'm reversed, so it's very hard to point. So that's the John Hancock building, and there's some artifactual moire there, but that's not a 3D effect. That's just because of the digitization. But let me just show you a different set of settings in the same scene. And even though this was supposed to be in with greater precision, look at the sailboat in the foreground. It's got, let's see if I'm pointing to it. Yeah. It's one of the lines has this very strange bend in it, and the little flag on top is going in two directions at once. The algorithm had no idea how to do that conversion, even though this was set to higher precision, higher resolution, as you can see by the lack of moire in the John Hancock building, higher precision in spatial resolution, but kind of clueless when it came to reconstructing the 3D shape of that sailboat.
But as you're saying, what happens is often if you recall, like if you have images that were shot in a 2D camera that you've had for many years, to see them come alive in 3D.
It is amazing. Well, and why I feel a little less squeamish than I do about that cheesy colorization process that they did with old Hollywood movies before they thought the better of it and stopped doing that, is that we do, this is the understanding of depth perception. We humans have lots of, in our natural intelligence, use a lot of two-dimensional cues to reconstruct the third dimension, even in the absence of binocular disparity. That is, we use texture, and we use perspective, and we use occlusion, we use relative size, and so on, so that even when we have an eye closed, even when we're watching TV or looking at a photo, we do see in depth, not the same vividness as we do in stereo, but we're using a lot of those 2D cues ourselves to get a sense of the third dimension. And that's all that these AI programs are doing. Not explicitly, they're not given, I've kind of looked at it, they're not given a list of cues to depth, like perspective and texture, but they're just trained on lots and lots and lots of stereo pairs, and then with each image sequentially to go from one to the other. So these algorithms are kind of doing what the human brain is doing, but obviously because training with billions or trillions of examples is probably the way the AI makes up in brute force for what the human brain evolved to do more naturally. It probably uses a lot of statistical tricks that work most of the time, but sometimes lead to these bizarre hallucinations, is what we call them in the large language models, but stereo artifacts when we use the Immersity or the OWL 3D or their equivalents.
You're a language guy, so when you think about it now, I don't know if you've used AI where we actually go in and you tell it to do things, but I've been starting to experiment with that, and it's an interesting moment because you have an idea, it's created into 3 pounds of Jello here, right? And you're trying to interpret that and and make a computer listen at some level and create what's in your brain.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what language works best, but I guess it's English because it's a very descriptive language. But you think there's another language that works better when you're trying to translate?
You mean another
an idea?
You mean another
Spoken language, yeah.
Spoken language?
Yeah, yeah.
You mean like German or Hebrew
Yeah,
or French or something?
Yeah.
Depending on what you want to talk about. If you want to talk about human folly and foolishness and knavishness, there's probably no better language better than Yiddish. The number of terms for calling someone a scoundrel, a schmendrick, a schmegegi, a schmoiger, a schlemiel, a schlemazel, a yatz.
God forbid a schmuck.
not to mention a schmuck or a putz or a mamzer.
I grew up in New York, so I know all of those.
Yeah, and as the old rye bread ad said, you don't have to be Jewish to appreciate the joys of Yiddish.
But that's interesting you say that. So would that lean towards that a more descriptive language that the machine would start to grasp quicker?
Well, you mean if you the problem is that these as one expert in AI said, Yejin Choi, she gave a TED talk called "Why AI is Incredibly Smart and Incredibly Stupid," and that's really captures it. It's mind-bogglingly smart in many ways. We've all used it, but especially for me as a appreciator of human intelligence, it is sometimes astonishing the kind of elementary errors that it makes, probably because it gets to intelligence by a different route than we do. It has it swallowed these models swallow the entire internet. They are trained on ungodly amounts of input which is why they use as much electricity as a medium-sized city. They've got thousands of GPUs, and they make up for sheer scale I mean, the human brain's has a lot of scale too. We do have 100 trillion synapses and 86 billion neurons, but still, a child learns to speak in a year and a half. The equivalent, if you're training it the way ChatGPT trained, would be something like 300,000 years. So clearly, 300,000 years worth of language, makes you pretty smart. But a human child does it in 2 years, and obviously has something of a head start, is processing those patterns more intelligently than ChatGPT does. And of course,
can I interject with a question? I know we're running low on time.
Please.
Sure.
Yeah, an interesting question. Do people who have a larger separation between their eyes, a greater interocular distance, the question is, do they tend to be bigger fans of 3D? And I'm also just curious, does this make people appreciate it more? Is it a much different experience when you have a wider built-in interocular?
I don't really study that. I suspect, a little bit, although I think probably a bigger determinant of why some people appreciate stereo and others don't is your childhood history of strabismus. If your eyes don't align, then you may be stereo blind simply because the areas of the brain that get input from the two eyes and then compute the differences have never been properly developed because of misaligned input. And I think that's probably a bigger difference.
And I'm actually kind of curious. I think so many young people spend so much time staring at 2D screens now. I've just been curious if perhaps there's a certain amount of depth perception that's just not being developed because so much time is being spent staring closely at a screen as opposed to interacting in the real world, playing ball, playing tag. I don't know if there's been any thought about that issue.
No, it's a really good question. I don't know the answer. I'm not, enough of an expert, but I do know that because of there's been a huge increase in myopia over the decades. One theory is that there's so much near work, that is, kids spend so much time either reading or in front of screens. Although another theory is that it's simply more time spent indoors with a couple of orders of magnitude less illumination. I don't know if anyone has looked at a trend over the decades in depth perception or stereo vision, but it's certainly plausible. Probably someone out there has studied it. I just don't know what the answer is.
With getting back to the AI stuff, I well argued the Cartesian 3D. I like to think of Cartesian 3D theater. For some reason, it makes me laugh. But is that between what Dennett was saying and that Cartesian theory, like the film running in your head and trying to describe that film to AI, is there some in between those two thought processes?
Yes. So the Cartesian theater was a term from my good friend, the late Dan Dennett, philosopher at Tufts, wrote a number of bestsellers, where he argued that was a kind of defective mental model that we all have when we try to make sense of consciousness. And by he meant many of his fellow philosophers and neurobiologists and psychologists, that there's sometimes talk of the kind of conundrums like, how do I know that my red is the same as your red? Maybe I consistently label something that you would call green if you could see it from my point of view. Or how do I even know that you're conscious? Maybe you're a zombie and you're just very lifelike. And since I can only directly experience my own consciousness, all of these are sometimes called the hard problem of consciousness. And Dan said there ain't no hard problem of consciousness. You're confused. You're imagining that somehow there's a little a little man, a homunculus in the head, looking at a screen inside the skull. And so you're asking, if I was a little man inside your skull, what would I see on that screen? He said, forget about it. You're thinking about it the wrong way. There ain't no little man, there ain't no homunculus, there's no Cartesian theater. That's in a nutshell why Dennett invented that term.
But you know, when laser projectors showed up, video projectors, they have a word. They'll say, I paid like 50 cents for this word, so I'm going to use it as much as metametric use of failure, which would be, you know, the fact that now a laser, unlike a xenon or a wide bandwidth device like that, right, that had many wavelengths in it, a laser is right on the wavelength. So certain people, because of the fact that all retinas of, you know, are not created equal, right? They're little antennas in here, but nonetheless, they're not exactly that some people will not see those colors properly, because that was one of the big things with the laser projectors.
Yeah, no, that's true and interesting that we literally, you know, almost certainly don't see the world in the identical set of colors, depending on whether our vitreous humor is yellowed. There's some people who have 4 cones instead of 3, and can probably see colors that others don't. All of those, though, you could demonstrate just behaviorally by asking people to discriminate 2 metamers, that is, 2 mixtures of wavelength that some people can't tell apart. Other people could say, oh yeah, those are different. And so Dennett would say, ultimately, you don't have to even talk about subjective consciousness. You can just show it behaviorally by what they can and can't discriminate. But yeah, though that is fascinating, and it gets into a whole other aspect of perception, namely our color vision as opposed to our spatial vision.
Hey, listen, Eumellius may not exist, but I still like saying Cartesian 3D theater, so I'm going to stick with that. but
a useful term.
Very fascinating. Particularly when, you know, I guess it'll be a lot of research with all of this AI stuff between. I know that every time you work with AI, like now that I'm working with it more, you have to pay so much for the credits. But here's what I'm thinking: while you're doing that, they take in like a shot glass of your creativity. No matter what you're doing, that's in part of the quid pro quo, right? Quid pro quo. You're doing something creative, and it's kind of figuring out what you think is a proper answer. You know, I imagine that's how it'll evolve to something that's much more accurate.
Yeah, in making sense of AI and what it says about human intelligence, and that's kind of what I struggle with with my colleagues. We're faced with a kind of a new alien species of intelligence, and we don't yet quite know what to make of it. It itself is kind of a parasite on all this massive human output, all these people making Reddit posts and New York Times articles and Wikipedia pages, and those are like human beings generating that stuff. These large language models slurp it in, and they squeeze out patterns and patterns and patterns and patterns and patterns and patterns with their layers and layers and layers of neural networks. So they are kind of soaking up the enormous fruits of human ingenuity and creativity. And of course, every time you use them, you're contributing to that. Now, one could say in defense of those models that, well, we humans take advantage of other people's creativity. That's what, being cultured is. That's what, understanding language is. That's what reading does to us. But, as I mentioned, the scale is so different. The sheer amount of training that these models need compared to what a human child can do suggests that there's got to be some difference, together with the fact that probably because we have some mental model of reality, these things just have tens of billions of parameters, trillions maybe, where there's statistical patterns where you can't really find inside these models their idea of any object or thing, at least not easily. And that's why they often do these mashups, things that sound plausible but that didn't actually take place. And they themselves, these models have no way of knowing, but we do have a sense. There are people, they do things, they're at certain places at certain times, and it may be a different style of cognition, despite the fact that these things are undoubtedly smart.
I was asking you where this is all going to go, but you kind of you found it. You went that way. And another just brief thing. The difference between when you shoot a photograph, when you feel it's time to shoot a photograph, in the laser safety, the National Institute Bureau of Standards, right? They have a quarter of a second. They say you blink and it takes about a quarter of a second for you to react. Okay, so that becomes a safety issue. Anything that you can blink for is below that safety issue. That's a nominal hazard, right? Anything above that is treated differently. So is that a processing time?
Oh yeah, there is. Yeah, something that I emphasize in my lecture on neurons in the brain to students is that people think of nerves as on the analogy of electrical wires, but they are just totally different orders of magnitude. Neurotransmission is really slow, and it's a process that's kind of more like setting fire to a trail of gunpowder than an electric current along a wire. It's got to be, the ions have to be replenished. And of course, we experience that when you do something like you see your arm, it's like the connections in your brain are obviously shorter. And so the processing is faster than getting all the way out to your arm. I'm sure we've all had the experience, oh, I'm going to knock over my beer. There goes my arm. In any second now, the beer is going to be in my lap. Stop hand, stop hand. And you just can't stop it in time because the transmission is so slow. And so, yes, when it's something that landscape photographers have to worry about if they're taking pictures a little too close to the edge of the cliff.
And that's the thing that AI won't get. We have a friend who often watches it. He was the official photographer for Woodstock, Elliot Landy. And you look at his photographs, and I always said, man, you seem to have the instinct of a gunfighter. You know what I mean? That whatever action was about to happen, isn't that a human thing though? Even though you're right, it takes all that time, but some guys can just somehow by some weird, and that makes that makes difference between me and them.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly variation among people. So, baseball batters, hockey goalies have to be able to react very, very quickly and do a lot of anticipation. Because for example, a batter can't wait till the ball is within a few feet of the bat. It basically has got to extrapolate the trajectory from the first 5% of the arc.
And now, have we got questions that you want to ask Stephen before we close up?
Well, the one other question I see here, there's just a question for a little bit more, or if there was any other insights you got into the magic eye phenomena. You mentioned that you'd consulted with some other experts on it. We're kind of curious, what did you learn about this, or what insights did you get from it?
You mean just how does it work?
Whatever. And it sounds like that was quite an eventful thing for you in terms of your journey. And so we're just sort of curious to hear more about that.
So basically, it's what I learned, and this is how I explain it, is there's really two principles, two surprises.
And that's in the book, right? Look the book.
That's in the book, yeah. So one of them is what you call a wallpaper autostereogram. Autostereogram meaning glasses free. And some of the magic eyes have repeated rows of identical figures where, if by changing the spacing between objects, if you falsely fuse them, if you have each eye lands on adjacent objects and therefore is converging behind the page instead of on the page, then you get false fusion and you get a depth effect. And that's something that a lot of people get just in real life. If you stand in front of a chain link fence and you kind of lazily look into the distance, the double image of the chain link fence can sometimes fuse and it looks very big and very far away. Or a man standing at a urinal looking at tiles a few inches away. Sometimes you get your eyes drift off, you get a double image, and then the even number tiles superimposed with the odd number tiles, and it looks like huge tiles far away. So that's one principle that these autostereograms use, and that's very easy to explain. Then the other one comes from a phenomenon called random dot stereograms, invented by a psychologist named Bela Ules in the, I think, 1960s, in a very early application of computer graphics, which is that you just have some random confetti where there's nothing visible. You take some of those pixels, you shift them over, fill in the gap with some other randomly generated pixels, look at the original image and the altered image in each eye, then the pixels that have been shifted over jump out in depth. And he called that cyclopean vision, referring to the mythical creature from the Odyssey with one eye in its forehead. that is something that can't be seen by either eye by itself, but exists only because of the binocular disparity, the difference between the two eyes. And so what the autostereogram does, I mean, it was an amazing phenomenon in the late 60s, early 70s, and a lot of vision scientists refused to believe it. They thought he must have left little artifactual cut marks behind, because it didn't seem possible that the brain could get a stereoscopic perception, not from something that the left eye sees and the right eye sees that are then superimposed, but something where you don't even know what you're seeing until they're superimposed. That seemed impossible. It seemed paradoxical. But the brain can do it just by statistically looking at lots and lots and lots of little bits of texture simultaneously. What the magic eye does is it basically combines those two ideas. So you've got like a bunch of stripes of random squiggles or swirls or dots or confetti. They have a spacing. If you then squeeze in or pull apart the spacing between successive columns of the same confetti, then that will give an illusion of coming out or receding in depth. And so your eyes alight on adjacent stripes of confetti, looking through the autostereogram to a point behind it, you get the false fusion, and then the slight discrepancies in the squiggles, as in Ulysses random dot stereograms, allow it to pop in and out of depth. So that's basically the two tricks.
So there's a question that I've always wondered about, and that is, how does somebody create one of these things? What do they have to know, or what do they have to think about to create one of those random dot stereograms?
Well, I think the vision scientist who invented them was Chris Tyler, so if memory serves. And obviously you can't do it without a computer. Pretty intensive graphics. And there are autostereogram generators. You just put in a depth map and give it a pattern of squiggles or random anything, or it generates its own. And they're easy for us users to generate, but an awful lot of thought and ingenuity went into them in the first place.
You are great. You really, your contribution today was fantastic. Your contribution, dare I say, to humanity has been great. Your books are to widen the understanding of how the 3 pounds of Jello does stuff.
Very kind of you, Johnny. Thanks so much.
It's truth. It's truth. I have a bunch of other questions, but I cannot make you wait around. You've been so generous with your images, with your time. The only thing I want you to do is, we need you back. And also be careful. I want you to be very careful every day, because we still need a positive energy. Like you absolutely generate positive energy, man.
I don't want to win a Darwin Award taking a stereo photo of the view from the edge of a cliff. I'll try to avoid that. Thanks so much for having me. Have me back. I'll come back.
Oh yeah, man. I'll come up there and kidnap you if I have. Thank you. So again,
And if I can just
please, I'm sorry,
interject,
go ahead.
we just want to put up the results of the poll.
oh, I'm sorry.
But we didn't want to interject with the fascinating conversation. But
Please,
we
I'm
did-
sorry. Go ahead.
so if you don't mind, I know we're wrapping things up late, but did want to share. We had can everyone see this?
Yep.
We had some fabulous winners here. Congratulations. Geez, I only had 2 dogs before the 2D to 3D conversion. How do you top that?
Man, David, that good one. Keep going down. If you
All right, let's see if I can do that. Yeah.
just read them.
Let's see. And then we had John Christopher, let's slip the dogs of 3D. Joe Pedotto, keep moving, though they're disapproving. Keep them doggies moving. Rawhide. Very good. I have my Poop Scoop Bulldozer following from Michael Caine. Rick Chomsky, if we're going to be all tied up in a knot, at least get to the shade. Harold Bays, I ordered a dozen balloons, not dogs. John Christopher, compared to my job, 3D is a walk in the park. And once again, John Christopher, thanks for all the entries. I asked for 3D and got 3 dogs instead. The others are just along for the extra storage on my S dog card. And on that note, I'll turn the screen back to you. We got some great entries. Did not want to miss out on those. Thanks everybody for participating.
Don't you love the quick wit of these guys, Stephen? Isn't that great? Anyway, thanks to this week's great guest, Steven Pinker, and our amazing crew, Dorothy Goodman, who nursed every one of those. Anybody who saw it in glorious non-anaglyph. Oh, by the way, thank you, Jim. We're not thank you for turning them into anaglyphs, because so everybody could really enjoy them. A larger group can. And everybody watching on the 3D TV, thank you for showing up. And also, again, our amazing crew, Dorothy Goodman, clicking away and running through all those slides. Jay Kuznets, website, everything, fantastic. Jim Harp, I just said it, can't get better people. Herb Weiner, thank you very much, running all those videos. Joe Pedotto, taking us on great journeys. A wonderful back to the silent movies. That was great. What a doll, by the way. Paul Hutchins, I hope you got your flat tire fixed, and I am, again, you've taken us on another, and this time it was up a lock. Oh, gee, that sounds okay. Well,
They drive on the wrong side of the road over there, so I'm concerned about them. Let's hope we.
That's right. You know, the canals, are they the same way? Are they actually backwards? You know what I mean?
It's dangerous. I mean, you ever try to cross the street in London? It's very scary.
And he spells the word tire with a Y.
Yeah,
All right. Well, I can see the problem. No wonder he didn't make it today. Good heavens.
Well, thank you all again, and thank you for stopping in to see what you've been missing in 3D. See you again next week. Until then, don't be stingy with your shutter. And by the way, stay off our anti-social media. Grow a garden instead. Share your joy. Count your blessings. Off to Barclays Arena, and I'm sure the lasers will be fine, and we'll be getting more lasers and mischief. See you guys next week. Take us out.
Thanks all.
New York, all the scandals.